Christopher Vaughn sat in the corner booth of May's diner at 2 a.m., his $5,000 suit incongruous against the worn vinyl seats. And when the tired-looking waitress, with kind eyes and a name tag reading Alina, refilled his coffee for the third time, he decided to amuse himself at her expense, leaning back with the arrogant smile of someone who'd just closed a $100 million deal and saying, "So, Alina, I'm a billionaire investor, and I'm curious, what financial advice would you give someone like me?" Expecting her to stammer, or laugh nervously, or say something about savings accounts. But instead she set down the coffee pot, looked him directly in the eyes, with a gaze that was simultaneously gentle and piercing, and said, "I'd tell you that if you have to tell strangers you're a billionaire, then money is the only thing you have, and that's the saddest poverty I can imagine." And Christopher felt like he'd been slapped, felt something crack in the armor he'd built around himself, felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and strangely necessary. And he realized that this woman in a faded uniform serving coffee at a highway diner had just spoken a truth that none of his wealthy peers, none of his business partners, none of the people who surrounded him daily would ever dare to say. Christopher Vaughn had made his first million at 28 through a tech startup, had built that into a fortune worth over $2 billion by age 4. And he'd done it through a combination of brilliant strategy and ruthless efficiency, cutting out anything and anyone who didn't serve his goals, sacrificing relationships and family time and basic human connection on the altar of success. And somewhere along the way he'd convinced himself that wealth was the measure of worth, that net worth equaled self-worth, that the only thing that mattered was the number in his bank account and the power it represented. And he'd built a life that looked successful from the outside but felt hollow from the inside, though he'd never admitted that even to himself until this moment. Sitting in a diner at 2 a.m. after another late business dinner, after another day of deals and numbers and strategic moves, finding himself strangely compelled to stop at this random diner, instead of going home to his empty penthouse. And now confronting this waitress who'd somehow seen through him with a single glance. Alina didn't wait for his response, just moved to clear a nearby table. And Christopher found himself watching her, really watching her, seeing things he'd trained himself not to notice about service workers. The careful way she moved despite obvious fatigue. The genuine smile she gave to the elderly couple in booth 3. The way she remembered that the truck driver at the counter took his coffee black with 2 sugars without having to ask. The quiet competence and dignity she brought to a job that people like Christopher had been taught to see as beneath them. And he found himself calling out, "Wait, I'm sorry. I was being condescending. That was unfair of me. I genuinely want to know, what did you mean by that?" And Alina turned back, studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether he was sincere, and finally sat down across from him, which shocked him because service workers never sat with customers, never treated wealthy people as equals. But Alina seemed to operate by different rules, seemed to have a center of gravity that wealth and status couldn't shift. And she said, "Mr. Vaughn, yes, I recognized you. Your picture was in the business section last week. I've been working at this diner for 6 years, and in that time I've seen a lot of people come through, all kinds of people, rich and poor, and everything in between. And I've learned that the people who are actually wealthy, truly rich in the ways that matter, they never talk about their money. They don't need to prove anything. They don't need external validation. But the people who lead with their bank account, who make sure you know they're billionaires or millionaires or whatever, those are the people who have nothing else, who've built their entire identity around their net worth. And that's the saddest thing I can imagine, because money is the most fragile foundation for a life. It can disappear in a market crash, or a bad investment, or simple bad luck. And then what do you have left if that's all you built on?" Christopher felt defensive and exposed in equal measure. And he said, "That's easy to say when you're working in a diner. When you've never had real money, you romanticize poverty because you don't know what wealth can do, the opportunities it creates, the problems it solves. the security it provides. And Alina smiled, not unkindly, and said, "You're right, that I don't have much money. I make minimum wage plus tips, and I live in a studio apartment with my daughter, and I drive a car that's older than most of my coworkers. But Mr. Vaughn, I'm one of the richest people I know. I'm rich in relationships with people who actually know me and care about me. I'm rich in time spent with my daughter watching her grow and learn. I'm rich in the satisfaction of honest work that helps people, even in small ways. I'm rich in sleep that comes from a clear conscience. I'm rich in the knowledge that I'm living according to my values rather than chasing more and more of something that never satisfies. And yes, I struggle financially. Yes, there are months when making rent is hard. Yes, I'd love to be able to afford better health care or to save for my daughter's college, but I wouldn't trade my life for yours. Not for all the billions in the world, because I look at you, Mr. Vaughn, and I see someone who's so poor, all he has is money." The words hit Christopher like a physical blow, and he felt anger rising, wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself and his choices and his life. But the anger died as quickly as it had sparked, because he couldn't shake the feeling that Alina was right. Couldn't deny that he'd been feeling empty for years, despite his growing fortune. Couldn't ignore the fact that he was sitting alone in a diner at 2 a.m. because he had nowhere else to be. No one waiting for him at home, no relationships deep enough to sustain him. And he found himself saying something he'd never said to anyone. "I have 2 ex-wives who won't speak to me, 3 children who see me maybe twice a year, and only then because their mothers make them, business partners who'd turn on me in a second if it served their interests, friends who are really just networking contacts, and a penthouse that's been featured in architecture magazines but has never felt like home. And you're right, all I have is money, and I don't know when that happened or how to fix it. And I'm not sure why I'm telling you this, except that you're the first person in years who's talked to me like I'm a human being rather than a walking bank account." Elena's expression softened, and she said, "I'm telling you this as someone who learned the hard way. As someone who made different mistakes than yours but still had to learn the same lesson. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to start building a life that's actually worth living. But you have to be willing to question everything you think you know about success and value and what makes a life meaningful. And Mr. Vaughn, that's terrifying. That requires dismantling the entire framework you've built your identity on. But the alternative is spending the next 40 years getting richer and lonelier until you die, surrounded by money and no one who actually mourns you. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone." Christopher sat with this for a long moment, and finally he asked, "So what would you do if you were me? What would your advice actually be?" And Alina laughed and said, "My advice would be to stop asking for advice and start asking different questions. Stop asking how to make more money and start asking what you want your life to mean. Stop asking how to be more successful and start asking what success actually is. Stop measuring yourself by external metrics and start measuring yourself by whether you're becoming the person you want to be." And Mr. Vaughn, those are questions no financial advisor can answer for you. Those are questions that require you to actually sit with yourself, to examine your life, to make hard choices about what you value and how you want to spend the limited time you have on Earth. Over the following weeks, Christopher found himself returning to Maid's diner, always late at night when it was quiet, always sitting in Elena's section, and their conversations continued. And through these talks, Christopher began to see his life differently, began to understand that he'd been operating from a scarcity mindset despite his billions, had been so focused on acquiring and protecting and growing his wealth that he'd never stopped to ask why, had been running from something, from his childhood poverty, from his father's business failure, from the shame of having nothing, and had mistaken financial success for healing, had thought that if he'd just made enough money, he'd prove something, or fix something, or feel something other than this gnawing emptiness. But the emptiness had only grown with the bank account, because money doesn't fill emotional voids, doesn't heal childhood wounds, doesn't create meaning or connection or love. Alina told him about her own life, about her daughter Sophia, who was 10 and brilliant and kind, about Sophia's father who'd left when she was pregnant, about the choice Alina had made to keep the baby despite having no support system or financial resources, about the years of struggle and sacrifice, but also the moments of pure joy, the love she felt for her daughter that made every hardship worthwhile, the person she'd become through necessity and choice. And Christopher found himself envious, not of her circumstances, but of her clarity, her sense of purpose, her deep knowing of what mattered. And he asked one night, "How do you do it? How do you stay positive when you're working this hard for so little? How do you not get bitter?" And Alina said, "I do get bitter sometimes. I get frustrated and tired and I worry about money constantly. But Mr. Vaughn, here's what I've learned. Bitterness comes from feeling like you deserve something you're not getting, from comparing yourself to others, from focusing on what you lack rather than what you have. And yes, it would be nice to have more money, to not stress about every unexpected expense. But I have so much. I have a daughter who thinks I hung the moon. I have health and strength to work. I have this job where I meet interesting people like you. I have a mind that can learn and grow. I have the capacity to choose my attitude even when I can't choose my circumstances. And Mr. Vaughn, that's real wealth. That's the kind of richness that no one can take away from you, that doesn't fluctuate with markets or depend on external factors. And once you understand that, once you really internalize it, you become free in a way that all the money in the world can't buy. Christopher began making changes, small at first, then larger, and he started by reaching out to his children, not with the usual, guilt-driven, expensive gifts, but with actual time, with vulnerability, with admissions of failure, and requests for second chances. And his oldest daughter, Melissa, who was 19 and had spent her teenage years being angry at him, agreed to have coffee, and Christopher told her, "I know I've been a terrible father. I know I prioritized work over you. I know I missed your childhood, and I can't change that. I can't get those years back. But Melissa, I'm asking if you'd be willing to let me try to be better, to actually be present, to actually know you. And I understand if you say no. I understand if I've burned that bridge. But I'm asking." And Melissa, who'd been prepared to stay angry, who'd armor-plated her heart against her father, found herself crying and saying, "I've been waiting my whole life for you to care enough to even try." And they began meeting weekly for coffee, then dinners, then longer conversations. And Christopher discovered that his daughter was funny and thoughtful and interested in environmental activism. And he realized he'd never known her at all, had created a fictional version in his mind based on brief interactions and reports from her mother. But the real Melissa was so much more interesting and complex and wonderful than the fiction, and building an actual relationship with her became more satisfying than any business deal he'd ever closed. Christopher also began examining his business practices, began questioning the ruthless efficiency he'd always prided himself on, began seeing his employees as actual people rather than resources. And he started visiting his company's offices unannounced, not to inspect or criticize, but to listen, to understand what people's work lives were like, to hear about their challenges and frustrations. And what he learned disturbed him: people working 60-hour weeks, because the culture punished anyone who left before the boss. People afraid to take sick days or parental leave. People burning out and breaking down. And all of this in the name of efficiency and profit. And Christopher realized that his wealth had been built partially on human suffering, on extracting maximum productivity while giving minimum regard for well-being. And he began implementing changes: better benefits, mandatory time off, flexible schedules, mental health support. And his executives warned him that these changes would hurt the bottom line, would make them less competitive, would reduce profits. But Christopher said, "Good. We can afford to make less profit if it means our employees can actually have lives worth living. And he discovered that the changes didn't hurt the bottom line at all. They improved it, because people who felt valued and supported worked better, stayed longer, innovated more, and the company thrived not despite the human-centered policies, but because of them. Alina watched Christopher's transformation with quiet satisfaction. And one night she told him, "You know, Mr. Vaughn, when you first came in here, I thought you were just another arrogant rich person who needed to be knocked down a peg. And I almost didn't bother engaging with you. Almost just gave you the sarcastic answer and moved on. But something made me actually talk to you, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I gave you the chance to surprise me, because watching you change, watching you actually do the work of becoming better, it's reminded me that people can change, that it's never too late. And that's a gift you've given me in return, because I was getting cynical. Was starting to think that people were just who they were, and that trying to help or teach or inspire was pointless. But you proved me wrong. You showed me that sometimes the right words at the right time can catalyze real transformation. And that's made me more hopeful, more willing to keep trying, even when it seems futile." Christopher felt emotions welling up that he'd suppressed for years, and he said, "Alina, I don't know how to thank you. You've quite literally changed my life. You've given me back my daughter and helped me start building actual relationships and shown me what wealth really means. And I want to do something for you. I want to help you. Please let me help you." And Alina smiled and said, "Mr. Vaughn, you've been leaving $1,000 tips every time you come in. You've more than helped me financially, but if you really want to help, if you really want to give me something meaningful, then take what you've learned and spread it. Use your platform and your resources to help other people wake up the way you've woken up. Stop hoarding your wealth and start using it to create real value in the world. And Mr. Vaughn, the best way you can thank me is by being the kind of person who doesn't need to be thanked, who does good because it's good, not because it earns gratitude or recognition." Christopher took her advice to heart, and he began using his wealth differently, not just writing checks to charities, which he'd always done for tax benefits, but actually investing in solutions, actually getting involved, actually using his business acumen to help organizations become more effective. And he started a foundation focused on supporting single parents, providing not just financial assistance, but childcare and job training and mental health support. All the things he'd learned from listening to Alina that single parents actually needed. And he invited Alina to join the foundation's advisory board, and she said yes. And they worked together to create programs that actually helped people, rather than just making donors feel good. And the foundation thrived because it was built on understanding actual needs rather than assumptions about what poor people needed. The transformation in Christopher was profound and visible, and people who'd known him for years commented on the change, said he seemed lighter, more present, more human. And his business partners were confused and sometimes frustrated that he cared about things beyond profit margins. But Christopher found he didn't care what they thought anymore, found that their approval or disapproval had no power over him. Once he'd started living according to his own values, rather than external measures of success. And this freedom, this liberation from the need to prove anything, or compete, or accumulate, or impress. This was the real wealth Alina had helped him discover. This was the treasure that had been available all along, but that he'd been too blind to see, because he'd been looking in the wrong direction, measuring the wrong things, chasing shadows instead of substance. One night, about a year after their first conversation, Christopher sat in his usual booth at Maid's diner, and Alina brought him coffee and a slice of the apple pie he'd developed a fondness for, and he said, "Alina, I need to tell you something. I've been offered an opportunity to sell my company for an astronomical sum, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And a year ago I would have jumped at it without hesitation. But now I'm not sure, because the buyers plan to gut the human-centered policies I've implemented, Plan to return to the efficiency first model, and I'm struggling with the decision, with whether I have the right to turn down that much money, whether I'm being foolish to care about policies that will be reversed the moment I sell anyway. And I'm asking you, as someone whose opinion I've come to value more than any advisor or consultant, what would you do? Alina was quiet for a long moment, and finally she said, Mr. Vaughn, I can't tell you what to do. This is your choice and your life. But I can tell you what I think. You already know a year ago. You would have sold without thinking about the employees, or the policies, or anything except the number in your bank account. But you're not that person anymore. You've learned that money isn't everything, that some things are worth more than profit, that how you make your money matters as much as how much money you make. And I think if you sell, knowing it will hurt people, knowing it will undo the good you've built, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. You'll have more money, but less peace. More wealth, but less worth. Than Christophorius. I called you Christopher instead of Mr. Vaughn, because somewhere along the way, you stopped being just another rich customer and became a friend. I think you already know what you want to do. You just needed permission to do it. So here's your permission. Choose people over profit. Choose integrity over money. Choose to be the person you've worked so hard to become, rather than reverting to the person you used to be. And whatever consequences come from that choice, you'll be able to live with yourself. And that's worth more than any amount of money. Christopher sat with Elena's words, and he felt clarity settling over him, felt the decision crystallize. And he said, You're right. I'm not going to sell. I'm going to keep building something that actually matters. Something that treats people well. Something I can be proud of. And yes, it means I won't maximize my net worth, won't join the ranks of the ultra-wealthy, won't see my name on another Forbes list, but I don't care about those things anymore. Or rather, I care about them so much less than I care about being able to look at myself in the mirror and like who I see. And Alina, that shift in values, that transformation from measuring worth in dollars to measuring it in integrity and impact in relationships, that's the real miracle here. That's the gift you gave me with that first devastating piece of advice. And I just want you to know that I'm grateful, that you changed my life not by telling me what I wanted to hear but by telling me what I needed to hear. And that's the rarest and most valuable thing anyone has ever given me. Alina smiled, and she said, Christopher, you did the work yourself. You made the choices. You put in the effort to change. All I did was hold up a mirror. All I did was speak some truth, and you could have dismissed it. Could have written me off as just a bitter waitress who didn't understand success. But you chose to listen. You chose to reflect. You chose to grow. And that's all you. That's your courage and your willingness to be uncomfortable and your commitment to becoming better. And I'm proud of you. I'm proud to have been even a small part of your journey. And Christopher, thank you for proving me right. Thank you for showing that people can change, that kindness and honesty can make a difference, that it's worth trying, even when the odds seem long. Christopher felt tears welling in his eyes, and he didn't try to hide them, didn't try to maintain the stoic businessman facade he'd worn for so many years. And he said, Alina, I want to do something for you, not as payment or transaction, but as genuine gesture. I want to fund Sophia's education, all the way through college. Full scholarship, no strings attached, and before you say no, before you say you don't take charity, understand that this isn't charity. This is investment in a young person who has a mother wise and kind enough to change a billionaire's life. This is me paying forward the gift you've given me. This is me using my resources to create opportunity, the way I wish someone had done for me when I was young and struggling. So please, let me do this. Let me help secure Sophia's future. Elena's eyes filled with tears, and she said, I was going to say no, was going to say I couldn't accept such a huge gift. But Christopher, you've learned to argue too well. You've learned to speak to values, rather than just throwing money at things. And you're right that this is investment, not charity. You're right that Sophia deserves opportunities that my income can't provide. And if I let my pride prevent me from accepting help that could change my daughter's life, then I'm being foolish. So yes, thank you. Yes, I accept. And Christopher, know that this gift will ripple forward, that whatever Sophia becomes, whatever good she does in the world, that will be partly because you cared enough to invest in her future, and that's legacy. That's the kind of wealth that actually matters. Years later, Christopher Vaughn sat in the same booth at May's diner, now 60 years old, and looking more peaceful than he'd ever looked in his previous 59 years. And Alina brought him coffee and apple pie, and he pulled out his phone and showed her pictures from Melissa's wedding, where Christopher had walked his daughter down the aisle and given a speech that made everyone cry, and pictures from his son's college graduation, and pictures from the Foundation's latest project opening a childcare center for single parents. And Alina looked at the photos and smiled and said, "You look happy, Christopher. You look like someone who's actually living instead of just accumulating." And Christopher said, "I am happy, genuinely happy for the first time in my life. And Alina, I know I've thanked you before. I know I've told you what a difference you made. But I need to say it again because sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd never stopped at this diner. If you'd never been working that night. If you'd never had the courage to speak truth to someone who didn't want to hear it. And I realized that I would have kept going the way I was going, would have gotten richer and lonelier, would have died someday with billions in the bank and no one who actually mourned me. And that's the alternate timeline I escaped because of you, because of your wisdom and your honesty and your willingness to see me as a human being rather than just a wealthy customer." Alina reached across the table and patted his hand and said, "Christopher, you've learned the most important lesson, which is that wealth isn't about what you have. It's about who you are and how you treat people and whether you're living according to values that actually matter. And you've become wealthy in all the ways that count, wealthy in relationships, wealthy in purpose, wealthy in integrity, wealthy in peace, and yes, you still have your billions. But now, they're a tool rather than a measure. Now they serve your life rather than defining it. And that transformation, that shift from having money to having meaning, that's what I hoped for when I spoke those first harsh words to you. And I'm so glad you didn't just dismiss me. I'm so glad you had the courage to listen and learn and grow." Christopher smiled and said, "You know, people ask me all the time for financial advice, for tips on how to build wealth, for secrets to success. And I always tell them the same thing now. The best financial advice I ever received came from a waitress at a diner who told me that if all I had was money, I was the poorest person she'd ever met. And Alina, that advice, that brutal, honest truth, that was worth more than every business school lecture, every consultant's report, every strategy session I've ever attended, because it reoriented my entire life. It shifted my North Star from wealth to worth, from accumulation to meaning, from success to significance. And that shift, that transformation, that's the real treasure. That's the gift that keeps giving." The story of Christopher's transformation became something of a legend in business circles. And when journalists asked him about the turning point, about what had catalyzed such dramatic change in a man known for ruthless efficiency, he always told them about Alina and May's diner, and the wisdom that can come from the most unexpected sources if you're humble enough to listen. And some of his fellow billionaires dismissed the story as sentimentality or publicity, but others reached out quietly, asking how to find their own Alinas, how to discover what really mattered, how to build lives that meant something beyond their net worth. And Christopher would smile and say, "Start by actually talking to people you usually ignore. Start by asking questions and actually listening to the answers. Start by being willing to hear hard truths from people who have nothing to gain by flattering you. Start by measuring yourself by different metrics. Start by asking not how much do I have, but who am I becoming? And most importantly, start now. Don't wait until you're dying or lonely or desperate. Start today. Because every day you spend building the wrong kind of wealth is a day you can never get back, is a day stolen from the life you could be living. And Alina continued working at Maid's diner, continued serving coffee and pie to truckers and travelers, and the occasional lost billionaire, and she continued raising Sophia with the same values that had transformed Christopher's life. Continued living proof that real wealth isn't about bank accounts, or stock portfolios, or luxury possessions. It's about living with integrity, treating people with dignity, finding purpose beyond yourself, building relationships that matter, and understanding that the richest life is one lived in service of values that transcend money. And years later, when Sophia graduated from college, her education, funded by Christopher's scholarship hand, when she gave her commencement speech about her mother who'd worked at a diner and taught her that character matters more than cash, that kindness is the highest achievement, that true wealth is measured in love and purpose and the positive impact you have on other people's lives. Christopher sat in the audience and cried, and Alina sat beside him and squeezed his hand, and they both understood that this moment, this young woman launching into the world with values that could change it, this was the real dividend of that late-night conversation years ago. This was wealth multiplying in the ways that actually mattered. This was the proof that one honest conversation, one moment of brutal truth delivered with compassion, one waitress willing to speak her mind to a billionaire, one billionaire willing to listen and learn and change, that these things could ripple forward across generations, could transform not just one life, but many, could prove that the best financial advice isn't about making money, but about making meaning, and that understanding the difference between those two things, really understanding it deep in your bones, that's the foundation of a life actually worth living. The only kind of wealth that death can't diminish. The only portfolio that appreciates, regardless of market conditions. The only inheritance that actually matters. And Christopher and Alina, the billionaire and the waitress, the teacher and the student, the friends who'd built something beautiful from an unlikely beginning, they sat together and watched the fruit of their connection grow and flourish. And they knew that they were both rich beyond measure. Not because of money, but because of meaning. Not because of what they had, but because of who they'd become and who they'd helped each other become. And that truth, that simple, profound truth about what wealth really means, that was the lesson that changed everything, the wisdom that transformed a life, the advice that was worth more than all the billions in the world. And it had started with 3 simple, devastating, perfect words. All you have is money. And it had ended with the understanding that those words were both accusation and invitation, both diagnosis and cure, both wound and healing. Because sometimes the truth hurts precisely because it's necessary. Sometimes being poor in spirit, despite material wealth, is the wake-up call we need. And sometimes a waitress at a diner knows more about what makes a life rich than all the financial advisors and business consultants and wealth managers combined, because she understands that true wealth is measured in relationships and purpose and integrity and love, and that everything else, all the money and possessions and status and power, all of that is just noise unless it's built on and serves those foundational values. And that lesson, that transformation from poverty of spirit, despite material wealth, to richness of spirit that transcends material circumstances. That's the real story. That's the real treasure. That's what makes this journey from arrogance to humility, from isolation to connection, from accumulation to meaning, from being poor with only money to being rich in everything that matters. That's what makes it all worthwhile.